The Scream Kings are in no way responsible for any encounters with the paranormal, extraterrestrial abductions, eldritch insanity, hauntings, curses, hexes, demonic possessions, cryptozoological sightings, or any loss of sleep that may result from listening to this podcast.
This is the Scream Kings podcast. I'm Nathaniel Darkish.
And this is Max George.
They were just screaming, and the podcast and marionettes were flailing spastically, and all just screaming.
Well, if that doesn't give you nightmares, I don't know what will.
Right?
We are talking about something on this episode that is a true underrated gem, I think, in the horror community.
Absolutely.
And that is the one and only Shudder's fantastic produced Channel Zero.
Well, technically they didn't produce it. They are the ones that are streaming it.
That's valid. I realized that mistake as I said it. It was one of those, no, come back words, come back to me. But they were already there.
Yeah, no. Channel Zero originally was a sci-fi series, but they just recently canceled it, so screw them.
Yeah, what is up with that?
I don't know. Everything good gets canceled.
We need more horror fans out there to keep shows like this going. I mean, they petitioned Brooklyn Nine-Nine to keep going. Why can't we petition this? Boogers.
Well, to be fair, I'm very excited about Brooklyn Nine-Nine still being back.
I mean, I'm not complaining, but Channel Zero is... I'm really excited to talk about it because watching the first season, it's so well done and it's so thought out. It's just great TV.
I agree. Like, I feel like I'm noticing more and more shows do this, where they will take the anthology series idea, but then do it by season as opposed to episode by episode. And I love this particular one. Like, I mean, some other series that, of course, do that would be like American Horror Story, but this show is much better than American Horror Story, but American Horror Story gets 8 zillion seasons.
Yeah, and we can maybe talk about that when we talk about the actual show. Maybe before we get too hot-headed about American Horror Story.
And the shots I fired at it.
Yeah.
Come at me!
Calm down. Let's talk about where Channel Zero kind of came from, and more specifically, the first season of Channel Zero is titled Candle Cove. And Nathaniel, do you want to go into what Candle Cove, what it is, where it came from, kind of a thing?
Yes. So Candle Cove is a creepypasta. So if you're not familiar with what a creepypasta is, it is a term that is used on the internet that is a combination of copypasta and the word creepy. So a copypasta is basically any story that would be usually copied and pasted, usually into things like someone's Facebook page or, on forums or things like that. It's easily shareable. You select a big block of text, paste it to someone else. It was also, used widely in spreading things like weird chain letters on emails and all that kind of stuff. That's kind of what that refers to. And so a creepypasta is taking that format of just kind of like an online post, and most of those are always purported to be true and things like that. And so it's taking that idea and then tweaking it so it is a horror story that is written in a way that a lot of times it's very convincing and can be easily shared online. And so this first one, Candle Cove, is specifically based on one of that same name, Candle Cove, and it is written by Chris Straub back in 2009. And so what that particular creepypasta is it's written as though it's a series of forum posts discussing like, hey, does anyone remember this old TV show called Candle Cove? It was like a puppet show. It had pirates. And then, people are, adding posts and adding more and more information to it. and it gets weirder as it goes on. Like, oh yeah, the bad guy was called the Skin Taker, which is an unnerving name.
And it almost reads like a Reddit post in some ways.
Yeah.
Where you have these kind of just little blips and blurbs from, random usernames who are describing this really old vintage puppet show. And I don't know about you, Nathaniel, but if you think back to some of the early 90s, like, puppet shows, sometimes they're horrifying.
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, like, they were really a big staple of a lot of TV through, like, 70s, 80s, 90s. I mean, I remember, like, Lamb Chop and, of course, like, Mr. Rogers' puppet show stuff.
Oh, can we have an episode dedicated to Lamb Chop? She's horrifying.
Yeah, so in that same kind of vein, it's this show about this pirate that's going on adventures with their friends, but it just sounds really weird, like, unnerving, like... the bad guy, the Skin Taker, which is like a skeleton, like, will, like, regularly address the audience, like, directly in ways that's unnerving. And then, it starts getting even weirder and weirder with this story, where it's like, someone's like, I remember that show gave me nightmares, and, I had this, like, recurring nightmare of just all the characters just screaming, and, like, there wasn't anything in the episode, it was just them screaming the whole time. And then someone else is like, no, that was an episode. I remember that too. And then it just goes on and on and on, and it gets weirder and weirder and weirder, and to the point that finally someone's like, so I asked my mom about it, and she said that when there was static on the TV, I would be like, okay, I'm going to watch Candle Cove now, and then I'd just go sit in front of the static. And she thought it was so cool that I had such a great imagination. And so it's like, oh, like, this show didn't even necessarily really exist. But it's in all of the minds of these kids. That's the the creepy twist ending of that particular creepypasta.
And I think it's important to remember too that creepypasta has kind of exploded on the internet. A lot of kind of modern viral horror stories come from creepypasta.
Mm-hmm.
And I personally think, after reading the Candy Cove little kind of Reddit form, I guess, if you want to call it, really does it better than a few of the other stories.
Oh, for sure.
Slender Man was born on creepypasta.
Yeah.
And that, at the heart, is a truly terrifying story, but it's become so popularized that it's almost lost a little bit of that horror. However, there's a caveat to that, of course, with the actual killings that happened in the name of Slender Man. Like, this stuff can get dark.
Well, not killings, a stabbing that didn't kill.
Stabbing? Man, my facts are off tonight.
She lived.
Pazuzu's inside me. Not in the fun way. Too graphic for our podcast? That's the first time I've ever felt
this one's
graphic.
Definitely getting an explicit label regardless of how many cusses we use.
Some other really popular creepypasta stories that have kind of generated almost a cult following would be like the Laughing Jack, Jeff the Killer, the god-awful Russian sleep experiment. I hate this one.
Ted the Caver.
Yeah, I mean, they're ubiquitous. They're all over the place. I can't tell you how many creepypastas I've read about how to summon Satan and summon Beelzebub and blah, 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 blah.
And some of them have taken on lives beyond that of just being a creepy thing online. I mean, like, sometimes it's just that they have a big, weird audience following. Like, Jeff the Killer, for some reason, a lot of 12-year-olds on the internet like drawing Jeff the Killer for 3 years for some reason.
Shame. Go watch something more wholesome, children.
Or just, I don't know. Like, that one just, it's not that interesting to me. But like, there's another one that was a creepy series of creepypastas called Pen Pal, and that ended up being a very successful novel once it was expanded by Dathan Auerbach. I think that's how you pronounce his name.
So, Nathaniel, you being a horror author, why do you think Candle Cove did so well, and primarily, why was it such good inspiration for a 6-episode TV show?
Well, to me, what I think it does a great job of doing is it does this great job of taking the things that are kind of like in the collective memory that we only half remember, like from our childhoods, because everyone has things like that. Someone will mention a show and you'll be like, oh my gosh, I watched that show a lot. I haven't thought about that in 15 years. Like, everyone has that experience semi-regularly. And so that is a thing that's fun to play with. So it takes, a bunch of people talking about something that they vaguely remember on the internet. And that's what, that's what, like, 80% of Reddit is just people trying to reminisce about something obscure. And so I feel like that is something that people really identify with. And then I think it also kind of plays with this idea of like false memory, or that maybe the things that we remember that as being a part of our childhood are a little bit more sinister than we realize they were. So, in this case, it's this thing that is very unnerving because it's not like it's this weird show and then no one specifically actually watched it. It was just static on their TVs.
I kind of want to dive in just a little bit and talk about those memories. Like, memories are so tangible and our brain can distort them so much that I think you make an excellent point to this. Is there's almost this dark, almost horror-esque sentiment about memories that we can't really remember our past, our childhood even, and so these little flicks and blurbs that reignite these memories, it can almost be insidious. Mm-hmm. I was just talking to my mother today, and this is definitely not horror related, but I was watching my little girl play t-ball, and I was talking to my mom about how I loved playing baseball as a kid, and I thought I was pretty good at it, and she looks at me and she's like, no, you were horrible. But in my mind, I have this memory of being this amazing baseball player. Like, memories are crazy. Mm-hmm. Reality is, we distort it to what we want it to be,
Yeah, and I always hear different numbers thrown around of how much of our memory is fiction. But, a lot of times if you hear, some researcher or someone say, like, oh yeah, like, realistically, like, I don't know, you hear numbers like in the 80s or 90 percentiles of how much your memory is false. It's, has a teeny bit of truth, but, if you watched it objectively, you'd be like, oh, yeah, that's, like, not at all what actually happened versus what, or, like, what happened does not match up with what I remember. Like, let's take the big weird cultural zeitgeist thing of the Berenstain Bears versus Berenstain Bears thing. You heard about that, right?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, and I guess, how was it spelled for you in your memory?
Berenstain.
Yeah, for me it was Berenstain, which is how it's spelled. And that's... I find it so fascinating that it's, that thousands and thousands of people very distinctly remembered it spelled a specific way, and that it had like a, I don't know, like it stuck with them that it was spelled that way, and then people lost their minds when they found out that it wasn't spelled that way. Because it was in their memory. It was fixed hard in their memory. So yeah, like, that's the kind of thing that this story plays with. And what I love about it, too, is that it's very quick. Like, you can read it in 3 minutes.
Oh, yeah. Just to piggyback off of that, sometimes I think we can get very over-descriptive with horror. Oftentimes the most simplistic things can really terrify you more than, dramatic and descriptive context. Mm-hmm. We've talked about this on the podcast several times. So yeah, I totally agree. It's a fantastic story. If you haven't checked out the original Candle Cove, the creepypasta, definitely go find it and let us know if it creeped you out as well.
Yeah, because just Google it. You'll find it posted on a dozen websites. It'll take just a couple minutes to read, but I definitely say it's worthwhile. Because it does a great job of giving that little eerie kind of like prickle up your spine sort of thing.
So to piggyback onto that, what Channel Zero does is it takes that kind of cultural zeitgeist of memory and, this creepy show that we've seen, and it illustrates it beautifully.
You guys remember Candle Cove?
That show gave me the worst nightmares. It can make people do things.
It's not just a TV show. The kids will see it.
These kids are hurting someone!
Just like we did.
Welcome to Candle Cove.
I really thought it was interesting that in the show itself, they kind of harken back to that all of these characters are vaguely remembering the show. And for some of them, it was one thing. And for a few of the other main characters, it was a dramatically different thing.
Mm-hmm.
And to quickly summarize, again, spoilers. If you don't want spoilers, run now. If you haven't figured out that we like to spoil things, then you haven't been listening.
Yeah.
The show itself, like you mentioned, it's an anthology, so every season is based on a different creepypasta story, which I think is brilliant.
Mm-hmm.
This first season, there is a man who is played by the wonderful Mark Brandanowitz from Parks and Recreation, also known as Paul Schneider. He plays Mike Painter, who comes back to his hometown, and he grew up with a bunch of kids. There were a lot of these weird, twisted child disappearances, ended up being murders. He had a twin brother who was really, really bullied and developed this weird friendship with these puppets. And the show, it was about these pirates who are on the open seas and obsessed. And one thing comes after another, and you realize that this twin is kind of living through supernaturally this monster who is kind of stalking the town, who is being kind of protected by one of the elementary school teachers. And they have this power to kind of control the minds of children to kill and to take teeth, because the twin is living in this monster made of teeth and is trying to resurrect himself through his brother, who is now an adult, who came back to the town. That's a horrible summary. The show is very intricate and very well developed and thought out. It's beautiful. It's fantastic. Some of the things I liked the most, as I just mentioned one, the practical effects for the show itself are mind-blowing. You know, we live in an age of CGI where everything is, special effects done on a computer, blah, 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 blah. And this show, the set and the designs that they created, the puppets themselves, the tooth monster, I don't know what we want to call him.
The Tooth Child is how I've heard him referred to.
Ooh, I like that. And the Skin Taker. You actually see glimpses of the Skin Taker, and you have no idea what he is. Is he a demon? Is he a ghost? What is going on? Is he just negative energy created by this kid who was bullied so much? But it's fantastic, and it's horrifying, and it's visceral because it's set design, it's costuming, it's amazing. I feel like I'm rambling.
Well, I mean, it really is something incredible. Like, I tell people, like, oh yeah, like they made a monster out of teeth, and they like don't really appreciate. They're like, well, that sounds kind of weird. And then I show them a picture of it. I'm like, they made that. That's a suit. And people go, oh.
Right.
Like it's impressive everything they do. Like the puppet show feels very authentic. It's so like they're so committed to doing this story well, and I love it.
And again, like even the puppets themselves that they're using for this childhood TV show, there's nothing like innately terrifying about their design, but just how they're portrayed. This Captain Skull, Jawbone. Jawbone is like this pirate who's a skeleton. He's not scary by any means, but how they portray him on the television show, his face is kind of fading in and out. You can hardly see it, but he's there. The music is very light and cheery, and all the other puppets are very creepy. And then you see children murdering adults. Like, the way they do it is just brilliantly done, I think. I am really obsessed with Channel Zero, if you can't tell by now.
And I think part of what makes the series work so well as a TV series is that the first episode really lays out that idea of the creepypasta. Like you see them have that conversation that you see as the forum posts at a dinner with old friends, and And then you get the reveal that it was just static on the TV at the end of the episode. And so then you have 5 more episodes playing with this idea, exploring it more, saying, okay, so what if there was a show that was like that on TV? What if it was making your kids do something sinister?
And I think for me, my favorite part about Candle Cove is how unnerving it is. You've got some very horrific scenes with children killing adults, adults killing children, these monsters, the tooth child, the skin taker, all these very, very thematic horror scenes. But at the same time, the tone of the entire show is very, very upsetting. And they do that with music.
Mm-hmm.
They do it with shots that just seem to take a little too long. For me, that's one of its biggest triumphs, is making me feel uneasy the entire episode. You never feel safe watching this show. And one of my favorite scenes from the entire show was when kind of the junior sheriff, her name's Amy Welch, she kind of takes over the investigation of who was doing all of these killings. She gets back to the office one day and there's this weird present sitting on her desk and she has no idea whose it's from. She seems a little concerned about this. I mean, she's got obviously children disappearing and murdering and hurting each other. And she opens up the present and it's just this weird bowl filled with a variety of different mushrooms. You have no idea what's going on, who gave her this. You're convinced it's, the tooth child playing some weird games, whatever. And you're just like, what is going on? And then the next episode, you find out it's from a crush who works in the police station with her. And you're like, whoa, what was that huge dramatic thing with the mushrooms? Like, it just pulls the rug out from under you. It's great. When I saw that, I just was flabbergasted that I spent so much energy being disgusted at this minimal scene that had no plot relevance. And it just
there was just something about that scene, like the way it was shot, the way the mushrooms looked in the bowl, all of that. It was just like, oh, this is... There was still that wrongness, which I think, even though it doesn't necessarily contribute to the specifics of the plot, I think it does a good job of kind of showing how the wrongness that comes from the Candle Cove show has kind of infected the town.
That's a fantastic insight that I really think I would assume the creators of the show were trying to portray, because Mark Brandanowitz, I can't think of his real name, curse you, Parks and Recreation, Paul Schneider's character, Mike Painter, is really seen as an outlaw to his hometown, even to his own mother. The town is falling apart with these children disappearing, getting murdered. It really, you feel the trauma. It's very visceral. It's very unnerving, like we've talked about. The storytelling is gorgeous. It's gorgeous. If you haven't seen this, go get a Shudder subscription and watch this show. Another thing that I really appreciated from the show was the children. Their acting was amazing. There were 4 in particular who dressed up towards the end of the show as the puppets from the creepy Candle Cove puppet show. And again, the costuming was gorgeous and it was terrifying as well. And it's children with machetes and hunting knives, like chasing after you in the woods. And especially with the other scenes where children are just mindlessly watching the TV in their homes and it's static, but to them it's this creepy puppet show. Like, ugh.
Well, so I guess, what did you like about the directions the plot took as it went on?
I really enjoyed a lot of the plot twists that kind of happened all of a sudden, but it felt very, a lot of these endearing characters that we wanted to root for all of a sudden would just die halfway in. Very Game of Thrones-esque, if you will. Mike Painter, Paul Schneider's character, he had kind of this weird love interest with the police chief's wife. They used to be childhood sweethearts. She dies halfway in, and you're like, what? No, she's not supposed to die. The creepy cop who gave the mushrooms, he kicks the bucket. It was just kind of all over the place with the deaths in a way that, to me, felt really realistic. Serial killers and crazy skin taker tooth children don't pick favorites.
Yeah, I definitely like that nobody was safe. I also like seeing how our protagonist, Mike Painter, isn't everything that he necessarily says he is. That you find out that, there's a lot of strain in his relationship with his family because of like a psychotic break, and maybe he was involved back in the day with the violence with the children and all that stuff. Like, I like how the more you learn, you realize that like there's no one good guy. It's just this kind of like spirally mystery that, like I kind of said before, has sort of infected this entire town. And so like everyone's tainted at least a little bit.
Yeah, and again, the entire show is very unnerving, and it makes you almost feel disgusted for watching it in some regard. It just is so well done. The music is fantastic. I mentioned a little bit earlier how they have a lot of cinematic shots on trees or wind blowing in the grass that are just a little too long to get you to feel a little uncomfortable, and then the plot continues. And I think that's fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
How about you? Any other complaints or positive remarks you have about the plot embellishments or plot twists?
I guess I just had one thing that, like, even though I love The Tooth Child, in terms of, like, its visual effect and how creepy it is and all of that, I felt like I just never quite threaded that needle of, like, so why is he a tooth child? Like, why is his brother that? Like, I just never quite connected that dot, and it bugged me because, like, I felt like a lot of other things were at least semi-explained, or that I felt like I kind of understood the weird internal logic of it. But with that one, like this weird tooth child that goes around taking teeth from people, I liked that idea, but it felt like it was kind of out of left field still. Like they kind of made it work, but it didn't quite gel as much as the rest of the series did. Did you feel that way?
With you there. Yeah. The only thing I can think of why it was teeth is because his twin brother had an extra tooth. That was the only way to like differentiate him between the Mike Painter character. But I felt like that wasn't enough. And the last episode did kind of leave me a little confused, which is not always a bad thing. I did want them to explain a little bit more where the skin taker came from. Almost made him out to be a demon or a ghost or an alien, or really just a creation of all this negative energy from the twin. And it wasn't really explained. And this whole weird resurrection, Jesus Christ kind of a thing, twisted though and turned on its head, it kind of fell apart in some regards at the very, very end.
Yeah, that's kind of how I felt too, is that like I loved like 98% of it, but that last 2% I was really just like, huh? I just felt like they almost had like they almost nailed it, but it's kind of stumbled a little bit at the landing just because they tried to go a little bit too far with like a metaphor or some sort of, I don't know, deep message or something that I just didn't quite connect to the rest of it.
It felt a bit contrived and kind of wrapped up with a pretty bow and said, okay, we're done. Let's move on to the next thing.
Yeah. And I guess the problem with that is that it felt like, so the skin taker was like created by the brother, but the brother was watching the show before he created him, and the skin taker is part of the show, and so I don't know. It just felt like there was this like weird kind of like circular logic hole present there. Like it didn't ever quite fully connect. Like there's like some other outside force there, but it never quite explains it or addresses it. So yeah, that's my only real problem with the series outside of so why a tooth child? But still, like, even with that complaint, still really like that show.
And I agree, and to piggyback onto that, we have this old lady elementary school teacher who's kind of the prophetess, I guess you could say, of the skin taker, who's kind of laying out the plan and making it come to fruition. She was very religious when she was younger, suffered a lot of seizures, and Mike Painter's twin was able to kind of stop the seizures with his dark power, the dark side of the force, whatever he was using. And so she becomes devoted to him, which is cool, and she loses her faith and kind of starts worshiping him as a savior figure.
Mm-hmm.
But again, like, there is that, and that has a lot of potential and a lot of like cool things you could do with it, but it was never fully realized at the end. It's almost like they needed one more episode to wrap up a few things of what happened.
Yeah, I just felt like there was just a little bit of cognitive dissonance there that like there's a few more pieces to put into place, and if I had all of those, I'd be like, oh, okay. But yeah, I felt like they kind of got out just a little bit too fast for that.
Another problem I think I had was that in the last episode, Mike Painter is able to go meet up with his twin brother in this weird, like, horror dungeon kind of a
otherworld
dimension. It felt very Cenobite to me.
Yeah.
I loved the Skin Taker. I thought he was awesome, but he was almost like a hurt puppy when you finally meet the real villain, which is this twin who's never really died. Yeah, and talking about it more, it kind of bums me out a little bit that they weren't able to solidify that ending a little bit better.
Yeah. I feel like it's one of those things that the like showrunners like understood what they were doing, but I don't know if I understood it. And so that's the thing, is that like I'm sure they get it, and that like if you sat down with one of them, they could probably explain it, and you'd be like, "Oh, that's how that piece fit there," and that's okay. But yeah, like you said, maybe one more episode to kind of explain all of that in a little bit more depth would have been very helpful.
A few other issues I had with the series as a whole is pacing in the first couple of episodes.
Mm-hmm.
While the storytelling was very compelling, I felt like things were kind of a slow burn kind of a feel. And I can appreciate a slow burn for what it is, but you gotta hook me right off the bat. If I'm fully honest, I watched the first 3 episodes of Channel Zero, and then like 6 months later, I started up again and watched the last 3, and I was fine.
Mm-hmm.
So I feel like I always say pacing is an issue with everything we review, and maybe I just need to have more patience.
No, I would say in this case, I actually agree. I felt like, in terms of like the major story beats, they did pretty good as far as like, oh hey, like the twist about it just being static on the TV coming at the end of the first episode, that worked really well for me. But yeah, some of the specifics of what was going on, and especially the first like 1 or 2 episodes, there were sometimes just a few scenes that dragged on a little bit longer than they needed to. Some of the scenes weren't quite necessary. And really the only problem I have with all those things is that maybe if they had kind of gotten into stuff a little bit earlier, they would have had a little bit more wiggle room at the end of the series to give you all the explanations that you're kind of lacking.
Another thing I kind of noticed was sometimes the storytelling kind of made you assume some things in the plot, which is not always a bad thing. I really love horror movies that know its audience and can, assume that the audience is smart enough to not have every single plot detail laid out item by item.
Mm-hmm.
But I felt there were some occasions where this took a little bit too big of a jump, and I had to pause the show and kind of think, well, wait, what about, okay, okay, I think this is what's going on. Okay, let's get back into it. But it felt like there were almost 2 or 3 an episode, which wasn't my favorite.
I agree. It's good. It's very good. It's just not quite perfect.
And it's good enough that they created 3 more seasons that are based on other creepypasta stories. I'm excited to start watching those and to really dive in.
So I can comment at least on season 2, and I started on season 3. And yeah, So season 2 is, I guess we can kind of talk about what each one is a little bit. I've read all of the creepypastas. So season 2 is called No End House. It's playing with a creepypasta that's basically about like a kind of a haunted attraction, like the going to a spook alley or, where you go pay people to scare you.
The worst places ever.
And by that you mean that we're going to this year record you going through one of those, and it'll be awesome, and it's going to be a great episode.
I hate them so much. Just show it to me on my TV. Don't force me to be there.
I am going to force you to do it this year, because it will be a hilarious episode to listen to you just going like, the whole time.
It will be very vulgar.
Yes.
Very vulgar.
That one is definitely going to get the explicit tag. I'm kind of the opposite. I love going to stuff like Halloween Horror Nights, like Universal, things like that. So I'm all about those. As long as they don't get to like touch me, like the ones that they're like get to like drag you away and put a bag over your head and stuff. No, not interested in that. But anyway, so this is one is supposed to be like very immersive, very scary, and very personal. And so it's like, so they're going through this, and it's just like uncomfortably personal, and then you get trapped in it. Is kind of this idea of, and that's what the creepypasta is. That's kind of what the main series is, but they make it much more personal with the series, involving like recently departed father and all that kind of stuff. So that one's pretty fun. I liked it. I didn't like it as much as the first season, but I still feel like it was very well executed, and like some of the effects were amazing. So it's definitely worth a watch. It's just not quite the same level of oomph that the first season had for me. Butcher's Block is based on a story called Search and Rescue Woods, which is a very long creepypasta that is basically about someone who works for Search and Rescue who talks about how strangely, like out in the middle of the woods, people sometimes find these staircases that go to nowhere that shouldn't be out there because it's a staircase in the middle of the woods, and basically talking about how like you shouldn't go up them. Like if you go up them, something bad will happen to you, and that they've heard that for a long time, and just kind of plays with that idea for a while. So the series kind of takes that idea, but then it puts it in the middle of like a Central Park kind of thing in a city, and basically is saying like, hey, this whole city has been tainted by this like weird family that used to run the meat packing plant, and I don't know. I'm not far enough into the season to really comment that much on like what it's about yet, but it's definitely weird, and there's definitely a weird staircase that goes to nowhere. And then season 4, which I have not watched it at all, but I have read the creepypasta, is called The Dream Door, and that's basically about finding a really weird door in your basement that goes somewhere.
It sounds like a fun HGTV show we could create.
Oh man, I would watch an HGTV show like that so hard.
Move that bus! Open that door!
Man, that would be honestly like the best like horror parody kind of thing, like taking that HGTV format, like, because like a lot of the found footage movies and stuff, it's like, oh, like Grave Encounters is supposed to be like a ghost hunter show, but doing that same kind of thing, like everything goes wrong, but then having it be like, I don't know, the Property Brothers or something. Like, oh yeah, we got to flip this house, but like not in a, the usual like, oh, we have to flip this house. Oh no, it's all sinister and horrible. Like, have it be the peppy TV personalities trying to flip the house, and it gets weirder and more sinister. I would watch that. I am tempted to write that now, honestly.
Do it. And Shudder, if you're listening, here's your freebie idea from us. Just as long as you cast me somewhere in it.
It's not free, and if you're interested in this idea, I am at NJ Darkish on Twitter. Hit me up. I will write this for you.
Hit me up, and I'll give it to you for free.
No. I'm the one who said it. Copyright. Screw him.
Let's go back to the shots you fired at the beginning of the podcast.
Yeah.
What, American Horror Story. I like it for what it is. It kind of popularized a lot of horror themes for a while. First season's pretty great. Second season I love. I know you have weird feelings. Whatever, it's fine. Channel Zero is so much better. So much better. So much more thought out. So much more developed. The horror is more visceral, more authentic. It controls itself. I know we kind of went on about a lot of its issues and flaws, but if you have to compare them, this is leagues above American Horror Story. American Horror Story's top 40, and this is a music album you find that you've never listened to before, and you fall in love with it. You know, it's beautiful.
Yeah, I would say the difference between Channel Zero and something like American Horror Story is that Channel Zero, even though it's not necessarily perfect, it does a great job of scaring you. They really go all in on the cinematography, on the effects, on the commitment to the idea. And also, like, they have a tight story. They've thought it through all the way. And even if it doesn't necessarily come through 100%, like we mentioned as being some problems here, it's still like, you know that the people who made it are passionate about this story. They know it front and back. While something like American Horror Story, you can tell that the writer's room are throwing out ideas, and they say, oh, well, let's just use all of those.
Let's just throw it all together. Lucifer? Aliens? Sure!
Well, but that's the thing, is it's not just Lucifer and aliens, and this is season 2 of American Horror Story, so you can check, it's Lucifer, aliens, an insane asylum, a possessed nun, a Nazi evil scientist who has monsters in the woods. It has, like, 6 other things. Oh, yeah, a multi-generational serial killer. What else?
Adam Levine. Let's remember him.
All in a single season, and none of those threads really tie together. They're all just there, kind of playing out. Sometimes they interact with each other, sometimes they don't. And I feel like, you know, a lot of times the American Horror Story writers will cheat. They'll get to the end of the season and go, oh crap, all those rules that we've been playing with, that we've established as the universe for this, those don't work. Let's just ignore them now. That's what they did with the first season. The last episode, the ideas and the internal logic of what the ghosts were and how they worked got all thrown out the window.
Fair points. Again, I like American Horror Story for what it is. It really helped kind of popularize horror to some extent.
But I guess my argument there is that I think that's a shame that that's the thing that's popularizing it and is getting all the seasons, when something like Channel Zero or Hannibal or a dozen other shows don't last because people are off watching the popcorn show that doesn't actually make any sense.
I would absolutely agree with you. You know, Channel Zero is phenomenal. Hannibal is gorgeous and beautiful. But to counter that point, I mean, we have how many Annabelle movies now? You know, what makes the money is what keeps lasting, unfortunately, in today's society.
Yeah, well, and I guess the thing that I think really bugs me about you know, the lasting power of the mediocre is that
ooh, the lasting power of the mediocre. We need to trademark that ASAP.
TM. It's that a lot of times if you make something for the least, or for the lowest common denominator, where you make a show where it's going to just appeal to all of the base, uninteresting human desires of, like, oh, you know, with American Horror Story, it's like, okay, let's have as much shock factor and sex scenes as possible, and you know, making it and not actually putting in any commitment to quality storytelling or like really developing ideas and taking horror seriously as a genre. To me, that bothers me, because people love seeing, you know, people getting it on, and, you know, oh, shock factor, oh, so I don't know, like all of the soap opera stuff that they inject into those kinds of stories, combined with all of the slasher movie stuff. It's what kills me about that is that when they have that kind of material, it's easy to market, because all you have to do is, you know, have a trailer where you have, a half-naked Adam Levine, and people will watch it. While something that is beautiful and intricate and actually takes the storytelling seriously, like Hannibal or Channel Zero, it's harder to market because you have to say, like, hey, like, you have to get invested in this. I don't know. I guess what I wish is that, one, audiences would take them more seriously, and two, that networks would take them more seriously. Because a lot of times what happens with these shows is that they maintain a faithful audience, but they don't necessarily explode in terms of numbers. And so even though, after a few seasons, they'll be holding steady at, 4 million viewers or something, and even though that is good, and like they're able to make good money on advertising and all of that kind of stuff, it's just not quite the cultural zeitgeist that they hope it will be, and so they don't continue to invest in it. And I think that's a shame, because I feel like a lot of the best shows, you just have to trust them a little bit longer. And yeah, like, I don't know. I guess my problem is that I wish that with TV, networks would continue to give money to creators who do good work, as opposed to people who are able to just get people's attention briefly. Because there's a difference there.
I would totally agree with you. 100%. A lot of the stuff we've talked about, our favorite movie of all time, Hereditary, was not marketed to the mass populace. Mm-hmm. And it's the best horror movie I've seen yet to this day. And that's sad that not more people know about that. But unfortunately, society is crippled by this. And I'm going to hold you to the same standard once we do eventually talk about, all of the Annabelle movies, The Nun, all of these kind of popcorn horror movies that we review that we still consider to be fairly good, but at the same time, they're just making a buck.
Yeah.
This next Annabelle movie that we have, it's like...
It looks bat crap bonkers.
All of the objects are loose. Oh no, it's the apocalypse. Like, it's just stupid when they could have done something so much more developed and so much more intricate.
Yeah. And admittedly, like, there is a place for both kinds of things. And I think that's totally fair. Like, I'm not saying that things that are popcorny and silly are devoid of value, but what I'm saying is that I wish that things that aren't popcorny and the things that actually are like artistic and have real and really have something to say, or have a unique way of saying something and are really standout pieces of art. I just wish that those could be taken as seriously by the people who put money behind projects, but so often they're not. And that's a shame. Because those are the things that will actually have staying power and stay in the minds of generations to come. I think people will talk about Hereditary for a long time, but people are not going to talk about American Horror Story for a long time. As soon as it's over, people are going to forget about it.
I agree. And I really think kind of the biggest thing the horror community needs to do is search out these really kind of underground mediums that we have. Get a Shudder subscription, watch Channel Zero, tweet about it, post pics about it, talk about how amazing it is. Mm-hmm. We're going to get a new Ari Aster film, the director of Hereditary, Midsommar. I'm ecstatic about it, but nobody knows about it. Let's get the hype train going. If I have to summarize this whole conversation, it's promote good horror. Promote the stuff that as horror fans is incredible. And if you made it this long in our episode, do your part. If you have a horror movie that you love, share it. Talk to the world about it. Let it be known. Let us know so we can share it with the world.
Yeah.
We want to know that stuff. We want to know the good horror. We know it's out there. I'd much rather, discuss and take time out of my day to talk about a horror movie or horror show or horror medium, a book, whatever you want to do, instead of The Nun, instead of Annabelle Creation, these popcorn horror flicks. Like you said, they have their place, but I would much rather, and I will feel much more edified talk about something that is art.
Yeah, and I think that's why so often people don't take horror seriously. If you say, "Oh, I'm a big horror fan," people are like, "Oh, okay." Like that's why there's that weird social stigma attached to it, is because people don't think about the artistic, well-constructed pieces of art. They think about the popcorn, and it's fine to think about the popcorn too. Like I said, I'm not knocking movies that are just fun or silly or are made just, on no budget and it's just people having fun out in the woods. But what I'm saying is, if you want people to look at horror with any measure of appreciation, then maybe, sit them down and show them something that is bringing something else to the table other than just popcorn scares.
So, before we make our listeners' ears bleed anymore...
Yeah, we've been banging this drum for a while now.
Crowns and Screams for Channel Zero Season 1, Candle Cove.
So, I'm going to give it 8 crowns, because especially the like visuals and the traditional effects and all of that, it's... Yeah. Oh, very good.
I would agree. I originally had it as 9, but then as we started talking about some of its flaws, some of them bugged me a little bit more than I thought they did originally. So I gave it an 8 as well. As you've heard me go on and on and on, I think it's a beautiful piece of horror. And go watch it. Go watch it, go watch it, go watch it. It's the story of Mark Brandanowitz after he left Pawnee, Indiana.
Well, it's the story of him before and after.
Yeah, there you go. As far as Screams, I gave it an 8 as well, and that's mostly because of the unsettling factor that it portrays throughout the entire series. It reminded me a lot of Hereditary, where you're on the edge of your seat, you're not sure what's going on, you're terrified, but you like it at the same time, and you want more. It's great. It's great.
Yeah, so I'm going to give it a 7 on Screams. I mean, it might be closer to like a 7.5, but I'm going to stick with 7. It did a great job of unsettling me. There's still stuff that really sticks with me, but end of the day, I never truly, it never truly got under my skin quite as much as I expected it to. But still love it.
Wonderful. Well... it's time we talk about something very important.
Yes, let's go back to beating our drum, but this time instead of sharing horror movies you love, let's talk about you sharing this podcast.
Mr. Max and Mr. Nathaniel would love it if you could write us a review on iTunes, on Spotify if you can do that. I don't think you can, but who knows.
Stitcher.
Share us, please. We love interacting with our fans. I can't tell you how many... Twitter conversations I've had with other horror fans. It's so fun to meet other people who love to watch blood and gore and demon possession on TV and live our normal lives. We'd love to hear from you. Please interact.
Yeah, and also, I mean, if signing into your iTunes account is too big of a pain to rate and review us, and I get it, I can never remember what my sign-in information is for my iTunes. We would tremendously appreciate it if you shared a link or just, even just referenced our name on social media, told a friend in person, grabbed your friend's phone and just downloaded a few episodes and just said, hey, listen to this thing, or just download it and then they'll wonder how it got on their phone, whatever.
Definitely do that. Do that one.
Please do that one. I really want to hear someone be like, oh, I fell in love with your podcast. I have no idea how it got on my phone.
We've got some really big things in the works. We've got 2 interviews coming up that are going to be really fantastic. You'll just have to stay tuned for those.
At least 2. Another thing we can plug shamelessly here is our now multitude of, well, not multitude, but our variety of t-shirts. So we have, of course, our Stay Spooky t-shirt, which was the original one that I made, and then we also have one that is a variant on Edvard Munch's The Scream, which Max himself owns one of, which is very delightful.
I modeled it at work, and everyone was very impressed that our podcast had merchandise, so get your own.
Yes, we also have a shirt that asks the very important question, who is your favorite demon? We also have a t-shirt, especially for the ladies, that says horror feminist.
My favorite, Daddy Krampus, saying, well, underneath saying, I'd rather be naughty.
Yes. So definitely go to TeePublic, just search for Scream Kings in the bar, and you will find all of our awesome merchandise. And I'm making more all the time, so definitely check out. And if you don't find one that you immediately fall in love with for some reason, check back again. I'm going to have another design or 5 in the next few weeks. So.
And most importantly, listeners, stay spooky.
Stay spooky.
Need even more Scream Kings? Here's our obligatory shameless social media plug. Follow us on Twitter or Instagram at ScreamKingsPod. You could also email us at screamkingspodcast@gmail.com. Help us reach a wider audience of horror fans by leaving a review on iTunes or by sharing a link on social media. You can also support the show by going to patreon.com/ScreamKings. Stay spooky.